Yeah, and I think the point here is that you shouldn't use them as a substitute. You should use them as a complement.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Abood, and the Core Four is with you today. We've got Paul, Tanya, and Martin. Welcome back, everybody.
This is so funny because Paul and I are both still have the expressions on our face from the conversation that happened right before you said that. And Martin looks so serious.
Stoic.
Like he was able to just totally turn it off.
That's right.
Aren't you the actor?
I'm all business.
You just bury things down deep, Martin.
That's right. That's right. I suppress them.
I wish you'd suppress some things sometimes.
Oh, well, how about what's on our nightstand? Martin, what are you reading?
I think I mentioned this last week. I read a little bit further into Momo by Michael Ende, which is supposed to be a children's book. And this is one of those books that Andrew Pudewa and I are going to talk about on the conference trail this year in our book talk. And we're doing children's books this year. So it's considered a children's book. But I'm reading this book and thinking, this is masquerading as a children's book. But it's really a book for adults. Because it's the section I'm in right now, they're talking about the gray men. The gray men are the people who come and convince you that you need, basically, he doesn't say it in there, but technology to save you time. And so it just transforms this society, and they have no more time left. They think they're saving time, and it turns out it's being stolen from them. So it's got a lot of really, and this was written in 1973, and you'd think that,
But that was when, because you and I grew up in that time when computers were taking over everything, and they were going to take jobs, and then it ended up actually, when computers came in, it needed more people, not fewer people.
But it saps this society of all its joy.
Well, and I'm going to opine without ever having read Momo, but Martin and I had this conversation yesterday, and my point there was that a book that is appropriate for children. You're not saying it's inappropriate for children.
No,
it's
right,
appropriate for children.
I don't think they would understand a lot of
right,
it.
But that also the bring something for an adult to chew on and think about is actually a really good book.
Yes.
That's not to say that and I haven't read Momo. Martin hasn't finished Momo. This may not be appropriate for kids at some point in the book, but just because you say it's masquerading as an adult book, it may be something that's actually really good.
Masquerading as a children's book.
Yes, it may be something really good for you as an adult to read with your child, and your child's only going to get some of it, but you're going to get a lot of it, and it's going to be enjoyable and worthwhile for both.
I just have one question. What is a Momo?
Well, it's a girl's name.
Oh, okay.
Well, and
nickname sort of.
We were looking at
it's
it.
A character.
Yeah.
Like it was originally published out of Germany in English called, I think, The Gray Gentleman.
Oh.
And then it was republished in the States as Momo.
Isn't that funny, the way they change titles of books,
especially
for an audience? They do that with British murder mysteries.
Really?
Yes.
Foreign movies are like
Agatha
that, too.
Christie's books sometimes have two different titles and it's the same book. And it makes me really mad if I buy it and I've already read it because it has a different title, which has happened to me.
Can you tell why when you compare both?
I have this marketing, will appeal and why Momo would appeal to the Americans. I don't know.
Well, and I like on the audio, I thought, well, this would be probably a really good one to listen to in audio. And you can get the audio in German. I think maybe you can get it in French.
And Danish. No, if it's in French, I would probably just go get it because I want to listen to it. But it's not available in English.
It's not available in English audio. So I think because he wrote The Never Ending Story, which is far more popular. And people, the only reason I know because of the movie, because of the movie. So people know of that, but this one kind of is in the shadow of that book. And
but Pudewa found it.
Yes, he did.
Tanya, what are you reading?
I'm finishing up. I'm getting ready to finish The Black Wolf by Louise Penny, which is I love Inspector Armand Gamache. But I'm also reading He Leadeth Me, which is the book written by Father Chiswick, like 9 years after he was released from the Russian prison. They had the book group last night. Did you go?
I did
missed
not.
it. On With God in Russia. And so I was interested because it seems so stoic, and there's very little about his internal struggles being a prisoner for 20 some years. But this book actually takes care of that. And I don't know, I think that maybe it was just too raw because the other one was like right after he was released.
Mm-hmm.
They basically, the Jesuits, I think, just wanted his experiences written down. So he did that. But then this is the raw one that said, really, we should have read them side by side because they're broken down into the same periods of his prison time and the different places that he was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing, the difference. And it's all about how he dealt with it, with the things that were happening to him and how he survived mentally, spiritually.
And I was telling you before we hit record that we, on a recent episode when you were talking about that book and with God in Russia, and I was talking about a book that I've really loved over the years, Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Caussade. Someone commented on our YouTube video and said the de Caussade book was very influential to the priest when he was imprisoned. I had never, that was something I didn't know.
I'd never heard of the de Caussade book.
Yeah.
And I may have bought it after that.
It's beautiful.
I bought about everything you all talked about.
Oh. But anyway, what a crazy connection.
Yeah, it is. It would be interesting now to read that book that's meant so much to you. Well, you should read With God in Russia.
Oh. I don't know if I have the fortitude. Things like that make me so sad. I do, like I said this on a recent episode, that the stories of persecuted Christians and martyrs are so impactful to me in many, many ways. And that has been the case for a long time. I've read a lot of those stories, but sometimes it's so heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It's so heavy.
It's a book I had to put down a lot and pick up a British murder mystery or Sense and Sensibility. I read alongside it part of the time because I couldn't read a lot at a time, but it was absolutely worth reading.
Paul?
I'm not making any progress. I mean, I'm still reading With God in Russia. I didn't finish it. I'd read it before, but...
but you started a book yesterday.
Oh, I did start a book yesterday that Martin has mentioned on the podcast before, Christian Paideia, Volume 1 by Welter. Brian Welter?
I think it's Brian Welter, yeah.
And I'm reading this because Martin has recommended this book, and I was like, well, we should probably have that in the Memorial College bookstore in the summer and at the conference. And Tanya's like, well, nobody's read it but Martin. Somebody else needs to read that.
Because Martin never finishes a book.
Never finishes. So I started reading it yesterday, and I was 7 pages in, and I went to Tanya and I said, Tanya, I'm going to pull a Martin, and I'm going to say this book is good enough to carry after 7 pages. It's that good.
And I said, no. Somebody's got to finish this book.
So I was working on that this morning again. No, it's very good. It's very good about starting with the Greeks and Romans and what the struggles there were with regards to what they're prioritizing, education, what makes them special, and then it transitions into then how Christianity took that and built off of that.
Does it feel accessible to a reader like me, or is it?
It is a little.
I think so.
I mean, well, it's getting into some technical issues in the history of education, but it's really well written.
Yeah, and I don't. So far, he has not gotten like into weeds.
I know you just started it, so it's an unfair question.
But just like I'm thinking, like Sister Miriam Joseph's The Trivium, like getting deep in the weeds of like what grammar, logic, and rhetoric are. He's talking about like the struggle between the sophists and Plato with regards to what the place is of logic or rhetoric, but it's not in the weeds like Sister Miriam Joseph is of what it is.
Because I know Jessica would love to revisit that episode.
Yes, I'm sure she would
do that.
So no, I do think it's readable so far.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Well, and there were some things in there because I've read like Maru's History of Education, of Classical Education, and several other sort of historical treatments. Where did this thing education come from? And so he has some things in there that I had not encountered before, some parts of the history that weren't included in the other books. So I thought it was well done.
Okay.
But Martin still hasn't finished it.
I was going to say, one of you has got to read to the end.
I'm almost finished with it.
Okay. Will we trust him?
Don't let anything slow
Maybe
him
you
down.
skim through.
Don't give him any projects.
I mean,
next
it's
week.
one of those that I could skim through, but I actually like.
You're enjoying
it's
it.
worth taking the time to underline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, there's no big rush. I just, need to order them by May if we're going to have them at the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the name of the book again? In the
Christian Paideia.
Christian Paideia by Brian Welter. Just want to make sure we restated that.
Okay. This is a part of the show where we normally answer a listener question, but we're going to save those up because we've got a mailbag episode coming up. So if you have a question that you would like us to answer on that episode, write us at podcast@memoriapress.com. Today, we are talking about abridged books and whether shortening a classic actually changes what it is. Is an abridged book a necessary evil? Is it bad at all? There's quite a debate. So, Martin, I want to start with you and start with the big picture and ask, what are we considering an abridged book? Is it maybe a retelling, or is it a collection of excerpts? Is it the shortened version of a larger novel? What are we going to use as our definition of abridged?
Yeah, yes to all those.
Okay.
Well, I think it isn't really a collection of excerpts, I wouldn't say.
Okay.
I mean, it is it's a book that if you read it and didn't know any better, you would think was the book. It's telling the whole story. It's just shortened things up. It's taken some scenes out. It's
Or like Tales from Shakespeare. I think it would be a good example.
Even
Because
though
it's Shakespeare, but it is written as a...
So that wouldn't be excerpts?
No, it's an
Okay.
actual retelling.
You're referring to Charles and Mary Lamb's
Yes.
Tales from Shakespeare,
Okay.
Which we used prolifically in our house when our kids were little, and it's just a short retellings of the plays.
On a children's level.
Yeah, it's giving you the narrative of the story.
Kind of like we do the Trojan War before we read the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
It's an actual retelling of the story so that students are familiar when they get to the really difficult prose of actually reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, or poetry, depending on what translation you use, or when we read Shakespeare and our students have already got the story in their head, and so it makes the really difficult Elizabethan language.
Yeah,
So
the
we're
question
saying
is-
we're saying an abridged book is just a shortened version of the original work.
Okay, so there are different kinds of retellings. Okay. You can have a retelling that is very brief. It's just a gloss on a book. I mean, in
Like
3
you would
pages.
get, you would get from SparkNotes.
that's not an. I don't think that's what we would call an abridgment. And then you have books that are like I have books that are very, very loose translations of the Iliad or the Aeneid or something like that, and very high quality. And they don't have everything in there. So those I wouldn't count as abridgments either. They're another kind of retelling. An abridgment is somewhere in between those two things, I think.
But the term abridged, like in common usage, would take any of these things under its wings, right? Because you could buy a book that says it's abridged, and it's literally the original work with some scenes cut out.
Yeah, right.
You could buy a book that says it's abridged and it's a retelling, that's still fairly sizable. Or you could buy a book that says it's abridged that's really, really short.
Right.
That's a
Is it the
retelling.
original text edited down? But what the sentences you're reading in there are from the original author, or is it a retelling where somebody's really just completely kind of
redone it?
Redone it?
Yeah.
Well, is shortening a book a problem, or should we?
Depends on the book.
Depends on the book
And the purpose.
Okay.
So we read the Iliad and the Odyssey when the students are very young. And so it's helpful to us for them to have the stories. So I wouldn't call the Trojan War an abridgment, but I would call it.
Well, that's like
it is a retelling.
It's like a secondary
But
source.
it is the story that Homer wrote in a retelling. So I don't know how to categorize that. Or the Aeneid for Boys and Girls by Alfred Church is the exact story that.
Right. So I want to make a point about retellings that because there's some things in here I don't think we're thinking about. For example, all translations are retellings of necessity because you're translating from another language into it can't be the same. So you're retelling it in this language. And there are, tighter and looser translations of different things, right? Also, any story, any book, novel that's made into a movie is going to be a retelling necessarily because a movie is a different medium. So every time you switch mediums, you're going to have to retell. It can't be the same thing, right? And also, there are books we have that we think are the pure thing, like the Iliad. The Iliad was told and retold over generations, and the form that we have, even in probably the most ancient Greek, is a retelling of, it came down that way. So in a sense, that's retelling. And then Tanya has made the point about prose and poetry. A prose version of a poem or a poetic version of prose, those are also retellings. So retellings are all over our literature. So if we can't say no retellings, because if we do that, we'll eliminate a lot of things.
Yes.
Okay. And so the concept of abridging a larger or longer story isn't necessarily something we've done for modern efficiency. It's been around. Of necessity because of we switch forms of literature. We've switched poetry to prose.
And even though we've only had movies since the 20th century, they were taking stories and making them into plays, right? I mean, it's a similar kind of medium shift that's a retelling. So, I mean, to say, you should never read anything abridged. I mean, that's sort of like saying, well, you should never go see Les Miserables because there's the original book and this is a shortened form of it. Right?
But you should read the original book first.
Oh,
or
see the movie first.
Musical is a pathway into reading the book.
Yes, which worked for me with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and there are some cases where it makes it almost a different thing, but it's also a great different thing. Like the musical is a great musical, but it's in the book is very different, right? But they're both great, and I think we need to kind of acknowledge that a piece of art. I mean, there's some people who claim that all stories are retellings of something, right? So we got to be careful about being too critical, I think. But then that doesn't mean we can't be critical, but.
Right.
Well, I think that's helpful. I do. And we here at Highlands Latin School intentionally use abridged books. You mentioned the Trojan War.
Well, that's not.
I'm sorry. You mentioned the Iliad.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Retelling. I think
it's a retelling. I wouldn't call it. It is an abridged story of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I don't know how I would categorize that. I don't feel like it's an abridgment.
Right, because it's not necessarily taking that exact story and shortening it down.
Line by line.
It's actually giving the kids a more broad understanding of what actually was going on, because the Iliad's very narrow. Like, you have to understand why the Greeks are there, what's the war about, all that stuff that the Iliad doesn't explain, whereas the Trojan War does. So they actually go into it with a little bit more understanding of the context.
Yes, but we do use an abridged copy of City of God, and that's because it's probably the most difficult thing before the Intro to Philosophy that our students read. And it's even difficult for adults, and we're asking 10th graders to read it. And so Cheryl did choose an abridged copy of City of God, but we don't use abridged copies of any of our novels, except I just found out this weekend that we are using an abridged copy of Oliver Twist, which was a total mistake. We would never abridge Oliver Twist, but we have. So,
but we did not abridge it. We just picked a book a version that happened to be abridged.
We picked a version when our version that we were using went out of print. We picked another one, and we just totally missed the fact that it was abridged. And so I'm fixing that problem. But it was ironic to me that this came up on the Memoria Press Homeschool Families Facebook page the weekend before we were doing this podcast. on abridged books.
It's interesting though, because what you're saying is there are some things that we find so valuable and meaningful that we are going to find the best of abridged version to get it across to them and have a meaningful discussion, like City of God. And then some books we say, no, the entire thing is worth it. We're not going to abridge that.
Well, and Tanya, you said we don't do any abridged novels, but let's talk about Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales and even Robin Hood.
So, well, Robin Hood is based on just legend.
Right.
So he wrote those stories to be his, just like Howard Pyle wrote them to be his.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would call that an abridgment.
I wouldn't call it an abridgment, but it is in some form a retelling. It's him.
It is a retelling of stories, legend that has passed down for years and years and years. What was the other one?
Beowulf and Canterbury Tales.
So Beowulf is a very short retelling. And the reason that, and people ask this all the time, why we use this instead of like Tolkien's or their other larger stories. And Cheryl always said that she felt like the main value in Beowulf was to show in literature that transfer from the pagan world to the Christian world, and that it didn't require a lot of time to do that, and that a shorter retelling of Beowulf could provide that more easily probably for students, and it just didn't deserve the time that it would take to do the big one. And so she just wanted to kind of do the story and move on. So it is much shorter, but I guess every Beowulf also is...
It's a translation. Every one of them is a translation.
Right.
Because,
so she just picked a really little one.
Yeah.
And now Canterbury, we did do this. The man, Michael somebody, I dealt with him years ago. The man who did our Canterbury. So we only picked certain tales that we felt like were age appropriate for our students. And I once made a mistake in an email to him because Cheryl really liked his translation. I called it a retelling, and he said that is not what this is. What he did is he felt like was every line he just put it. He thinks he left it pure, but just anglicized the
language.
Yes, the language. He wanted it made, and I don't even remember what we put on the subtitle, to please him. About that, he wasn't just retelling the stories. He was staying as close to the original as he could, to that original. He used that original Chaucer language to do it.
Okay.
And it is only certain stories.
Right.
And I can't think of anything else we have abridged, but who knows? There could be something out there that I don't even know is abridged.
There is the opinion out there that when you put an abridged book before a child, you're kind of robbing them of the full experience. Would we agree with that?
No, because again, the question's the purpose, right? If you're telling your second grader or third grader, like your goal in your education is to read all the great books, and in order to get you started here, we're going to start with abridged books. Yeah, you're going to be robbing them because they're going to think, I've read it, don't need to go back to it, right? But if your goal is to, there's a few different goals you could have, but the one that keeps coming to mind is like, if you have a voracious reader, you have an absolute voracious reader that you're trying to continuously put good stuff in front of them, but, either because that classic has some stuff that's adult themed in it, or because they're just not at the reading level where they could do it. And you're like, here, read this, but there's the full intent that you're going back later in 10th grade, 11th grade or whatever to go read the original, then that's, I would say that's a fine use. That was my case as a child. My mother just could not stay in front of me. And I've talked here before about the great illustrated classics because they were something good for me to read. And it took my 8th grade dean to tell me, no, you didn't actually read those books. Right. And then it was, okay, now I'm going. And once I went and read one and I realized the difference, I was like, oh, okay, now there's a whole new world open to me.
But it was a world that you had better access to because you were familiar with the story.
You had an on-ramp.
Yes, he did have an on-ramp, and my kids read them as well. And they never said, "Oh, I've already read King Arthur," because they had read the Great Illustrated Classic.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's interesting.
I wouldn't say go read the Great Illustrated Classics in your school time,
No.
and then is to prepare them later. But I'm saying if child's reading outside of class time, like those are great on ramps later
Yes.
on.
Yeah, but and I think the point here is that you shouldn't use them as a substitute. You should use them as a complement to
And
real
we've
books.
got also the little books that are little second grade readers, basically on the second grade level, of some little stories from Wind in the Willows, Dr. Dolittle, Tom Sawyer, and one more.
There was the Jungle Book.
Oh, the Jungle Book.
Yeah.
And those are, I mean, you could say those are abridged Wind in the Willows, but I mean, it would be like really abridged because it's some of the stories, just like 4 or 6 of the little stories from Wind in the Willows on a second grade level. I don't think there's any harm in that at all. We don't use them in our curriculum. We just use them as like options for students.
Additional phonetic readers,
yes,
right?
Yes. Well, I don't even know. They're not phonetic enough.
Yeah, they're just
Either.
easier
They're
readers.
on a second grade, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think you need to be careful to do so much of that, of reading easier versions of things they're going to read later anyway. And you need to ask yourself, what are you not teaching now so that really does need to be taught now, the full thing that's appropriate for this age.
Right.
So that you're not taking up time.
You don't
That's a
want to
good
take up
point.
school time.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Like if you can determine that this particular content is just not appropriate for now, what is the best thing to spend time on now?
Right.
And then save it.
Yeah,
for
That's
later.
right. And it
because there
would
are
be
things-
age-appropriate books that
Yes.
are
Written for that
full,
age.
Exactly.
not abridged.
Right.
Not abridged Charlotte's Web, not
Right.
abridged Farmer Boy. But
Right.
And
Right.
you know, the reading level is an important thing, right? Like you always want to be putting stuff that's just challenging their reading level, getting their vocabulary up higher and higher,
yes.
right? And so you really don't want to be continuously giving them stuff that is easy or lower for them, right? Like, and that's why for me the context is outside of class time when I'm pleasure reading. Like it was nice as a child to have something that was abridged that was
Yes.
easier, but what was being presented to me in the time of like dedicated active training is stuff that's higher and that's challenging me, which then meant that the stuff that I was reading outside of class could be harder and harder as well. And so you really do have to think about, am I challenging the student, not in a way that's going to kill their level of learning, but that's going to continuously grow their vocabulary, their ability to decode, to comprehend, and all of that.
And also, I think in our movement, we can easily get into this mindset where there are the classics and these are the thing and these are the only thing. Well, we have a whole tradition in English of classic children's literature, and it's written for these age groups. It really is better, I think, reading a lot of these classic children's books that are written for those age levels than trying to do too much of the retellings of those other books, because again, these are written for that age. They'll get those other things later. You're preparing them for it by reading these things that are at their age.
Yeah.
When it comes to adults, is it ever appropriate for an adult to rely on an abridged classic, or should we say, you know what, in this modern age of wanting everything to be convenient, maybe it's an act of defiance to just say, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to read the Count of Monte Cristo, the whole thing. Or
I think
What do
I
you
would
think?
look to, like, I struggled with orthodoxy and I put it down and I quit. But instead of looking for a retelling of orthodoxy, I felt like what I needed to do was go to like a Dale Ahlquist book that talks about Chesterton and what he was doing with orthodoxy and laying out the themes for me, and then go back to orthodoxy.
I see.
I think that would be better than saying I'm looking for an abridged copy of orthodoxy.
So if you can't handle a particular book,
Maybe a commentary.
then go to somebody talking about that book. So it sort of lays it out for you.
Or find a group that you could do it chapter by chapter with. That would have helped me as well, but nobody would read it with me.
That's come up before. I feel like it's a point of bitterness for Tanya. But that's actually a really interesting approach. I don't know many people that do that, but I love how you described it to say, if you encounter something that's difficult, instead of putting it down entirely forever, go to another source that's going to fill it out for you. Or it's almost like reading the preface. You know how sometimes in a book, some of those introductory passages are extremely helpful so that you understand the context of what you're about to read. Sometimes I skip them because I don't want to know. Yeah, but sometimes they're so helpful.
Sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes they're spoilers. Sometimes they're very academic. Like there's just, you never know.
I feel like in our Divine Comedy translation that we use, the notes I think are extremely helpful. I think it really helped my kids to have those notes in that translation. I don't know if there were any spoilers or not, but I do think that made the Divine Comedy more accessible. But there are books that the notes are just, it's just like, especially a novel, they can be, I just don't try to ignore them because there are so many. They over-explain, they explain every word that might be archaic.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I agree with that. And so, I mean, there have been great commentaries written. I think there are commentaries on the Bible that people read. Should we do that? I mean, so, and I do love, what's the translation of the Divine Comedy that we use?
Chardy?
Chardy, John Chardy. I love his translation. His commentaries are good, although I prefer Dorothy Sayers' commentaries, but I do not prefer her translation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Her retelling is,
But her notes are better.
But her notes are better.
Huh.
And I think the if we're talking about classics, I think the important thing to remember is these were written for people to enjoy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And as such, if you are going to then say, this is too difficult for me, then the perfect solution is not to say, well, I'm just going to read something simpler and kind of get the story. Perfect solution is to work towards the point where it does become something enjoyable for you.
So choose something different that is on your level, which we all have had to do. I mean, I wouldn't have even tried orthodoxy 15 years ago. Because I knew it was way beyond me. I started with the Iliad and the Odyssey and, books like that that my kids were reading. And then I was able to, I don't know, I guess it just trains your brain or you're just able to do more difficult things. Just like with our students, we just make it more difficult as we go. And we need to be lifelong learners and working on challenging things. Now that's hard. If you were homeschooling 7 children, I get it. At that point, just read your kids' curriculum.
And we've talked
But then
about
when
that.
you finish that, then you're ready for the more difficult adult things. And we are. If you look at our high school curriculum, it is adult books that we're taking our students through, and it is mere introductions to them. My husband was talking this morning about the City of God and how difficult it was. He taught, well, first we had it in the 9th grade when he was teaching, and now we've moved it to 10th. But, he said you're just giving them an introduction. There is no way they can comprehend all of what is in the City of God. But then when they get to college and redo it, it's done its purpose. I shouldn't have said the City of God because we do use an abridged version, but it's still this big. How big is the, if you didn't use an abridged version? I don't even know.
I think they just kind of shrink the text. It's still about that big.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things you have to try to do as a school is to give your students a broad general education. I mean, there's certain specific things, the really, really important things that you delve deeply into. But one of the things you're trying to do is to give them a wide body of knowledge. I've been in a debate right now, but phonics, and also, in reading the importance of having a bunch of background knowledge so that you understand the references, right? Because the more sophisticated the literature, the more it's assuming you know. And in order to understand it, you have to have that background knowledge. And so I think this, to me, is the purpose that a lot of abridged things, particularly like the ones you're talking about, because we had those illustrated classics in our home, and our children, I wanted them to read as many of those, just burn through them. You know, get that general story down so it's back there somewhere, and you can pull it out when somebody says something about that story. At least you know, generally speaking, what it's about, maybe who the main character was, all of that,
and they're safe.
And and they're safe. Yeah. So part of I think the purpose of abridged books is this broadening aspect of them, of getting this broad general cultural literacy, right? It'd be harder to get if you really did just totally confine yourself to the originals of everything because you couldn't read as many books. So, you know, you're trying to do two things in education. You got to balance those in some way.
But we're not using abridged books.
No, we're not. But I'm just saying that if people at home are listening to this and they've got those abridged books that Paul is referencing, that's okay for a certain purpose when they're young.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is the difference.
You know, the kids should be reading
if you've
all
got
the
a
time.
6th grader who's ready to read King Arthur and you give that 6th grader the Great Illustrated Classic, which is on a 3rd grade level, 4th grade level, then you're not doing anybody any favors. Your student, as Paul had said, isn't going to keep progressing. But in the end, whatever their broad education is, and that is what we're giving them, when they get out of high school, they are then really just starting their education. We've given them the foundation, but they hopefully will continue to read and study and be happy with an elevated book of prose or poetry and revisit them and get, every time we read a book again, we get something different out of it.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many. There are books that we have that we want our children to read again and again and again, and so the fact that they've read it in a retelling is, I think, just going to contribute to that. Because the other thing is, if you give a child a book that they're not ready for and they attempt it and fail, they're going to remember that about that book, and they're going to avoid that book in the future. I remember trying to read Ivanhoe when I was very young, and Sir Walter Scott is pretty dense, right? Particularly for a child. I mean, I love Walter Scott now, but it took me many years to psychologically get over that and attempt it again.
Yeah,
and then when
point.
I did, I enjoyed it. If I had read a retelling earlier, knowing that it was a retelling, it wasn't the real book, I would have been much more likely to want to go read Ivanhoe.
That's right. Well, it's like, so Robin Hood, say you read the Great Illustrated Classic, and then in 5th grade, you read the Roger Lancelot Green, and then you read Ivanhoe, which has the same stories in it. And then you read The Once and Future King, which is like a satire on it or just a comedic retelling of much of it, which is not appropriate for young children. But you've done all of this, so at the end, you really do understand those legends about Robin Hood. And so we do that with a lot of things. With King Arthur, then we do The Lady of Shalott. You could do Le Morte d'Arthur, though now I would say do Malcolm Guite. So all of that revisiting then gives students the same canon of knowledge and helps them every time they do a more difficult one, they get something different out of it. But in the end, they do recognize it is the same themes, the same content. It's just on a higher level.
Right.
So maybe we start abridged before they're ready for
As an entree.
but once they're ready for the real thing, then we need to do the real thing. We don't need to do, if we're going to do Le Morte d'Arthur, we need to do it in 11th or 12th grade, not in 5th. So what are we doing in 5th? King Arthur.
Well, and it's funny because your experience with Ivanhoe, Martin, I had the exact opposite experience. I mean, I was in
Really?
8th or 9th grade. It was on that list that the Dean of Studies gave me of books I could read. And I read Ivanhoe, and I've just never forgot. I couldn't tell you what the story's about. I remember Ivanhoe, I think it's Ivanhoe, pretending to be a monk. And the only thing he needed to know was Dominus Vobiscum, so that people would think he was a monk because he didn't know Latin, but he needed to kind of fake like he knew Latin. And then I remember the reference to Judges 4:12, where she drives a tent peg through the guy's head.
I can't believe
Because
you remember
that was a footnote in the book, and I was reading, and there's not a lot of footnotes in Ivanhoe.
Right.
And all of a sudden I'm like, why is this your footnote? Why is this referring to Judges? What story is this about? Then I went to my Bible and I was like, holy smokes, never read that story before. So that was my experience with Ivanhoe.
Well, that's good.
But it was, I was 8th or 9th grade. I was old enough
We
to.
should read it for book group.
It's a great book.
But I'm telling you,
It's a great
my wife and I read it on 2 long car trips, and it is involved. Excuse me. It is involved, and it is dense. And I remember my wife has this look on her face when she's listening to the story, and and I never know what she's thinking, until afterwards. She will only tell me afterwards. And she said, that girl, that woman, Rebecca, she just thought she would, and she's this saintly presence in that book. She's a Jewish woman.
Yep.
It's a beautiful book, but it is dense.
Ivanhoe is not any harder than the Talisman, right?
I'd say
It's
they're
about the
about the
same.
same.
Yeah, okay.
All of Scott's books are.
They're just
like
that
yeah.
more elevated, archaic
Yes.
language that is difficult sometimes for students.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. A case for abridged books and a case against, I suppose.
Right.
It's appropriate in some
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
compliment,
It's-
not a substitute.
a compliment,
And
not
it
a
just
substitute.
requires discernment. What's
right.
your goals?
That's right.
What's the purpose of doing this? And are you meeting sort of the fundamental goals of being immersed in the classics and knowing the culture and tradition?
That's right. Well said. Well, thanks, guys. I feel like I actually added to my book list today.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Good.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.